Here. I'm sorry that I was running late. The weather is like the pits today. Apparently not here though. I missed you guys. I don't know what happened, but so I'm Sara Henderson. I have been working for Common Cause Georgia since January of this year. Like she said, last year I spent the majority of the year working for the Bernie Sanders campaign. I also worked for the Jim Barksdale campaign. But now I'm doing some nonprofit work, which I really love. My heart and soul is in organizing, and I absolutely love doing all of the grassroots work that I've done in the past and we're currently doing with Common Cause. So this handout that she is passing out gives you an overview, sort of the issue that we're really working on this year. And I'll talk about voting machines issues in a minute because that's been a really hot topic here in Georgia as of late. Who knows the percentage of folks under the Gold Dome in Atlanta who ran unopposed last year in 2016? Of course you think. Aaron, you has everything? Yeah. Go ahead.
What I understand is, like, I don't know exactly how many ran unopposed, but I know that out of 180 state house seats in Atlanta, only 31 received opposition from from more than one party.
Yeah, so 82% of those folks under the Gold Dome ran unopposed. Wow. 82%. I mean, that's almost like mind-blowing to think about, right? And you all as Indivisible members know that, just sort of like Common Cause, we're all about good government. And we're all about protecting democracy. And we feel like it's more important now than ever to work in these spaces and try to do everything we can to ensure that every single vote counts. Now, why do these people run unopposed? Why do they feel like, well, I'm just, I'm comfortable, I'm an incumbent, I have an advantage? Because of gerrymandering. And that is, people ask all the time, they'll call my office, want to talk about national issues. How did Trump get elected? Gerrymandering. That's why we have this crazy political climate that we have. Because the folks in power are truly invested in staying in power, so they draw the districts in a way that they don't have to be competitive. They don't have any opposition because people think, well, this guy's been in office for 2 decades and I live in a red district. Big surprise though, 46 to 47% of Georgians are Democrats. But you would not know that from going to the state capitol, because you think, forget about it. We're never going to get a Democratic governor. We're never going to have any other party but Republican who is in power, because all you see at the Capitol are these state legislators who are focused on social issues and issues that they have to bring home to their voters, which are only 10% of the roughly 56,000 people that each House member represents and about 86,000 that they represent in the state Senate. 10%. They only have to speak to their primary voters because that's the only people they have to worry about coming out and voting. I mean, you're talking about 10% of those folks who are super voters, right? That's all they have to talk to. Now, I wish I really should start traveling with maps so I could show you all how crazy some of these districts are. Now, good news about the redistricting fight, we just beat back a really terrible bill that affected 9 House districts this past legislative session, 2017. And 2 of the districts that are in Metro Atlanta, we put these great visual maps together. You could literally see the movement of whites and blacks in and out of these districts from miles away. We're not talking about contiguous districts here that they're moving people in and out from miles away. Well, Common Cause, Georgia NAACP, a couple of other groups, ACLU, we all threatened to sue. We said, if you pass these maps, the governor signs them into law, we're going to sue. 2 days later, the 2 most egregious districts were removed from the bill, and we fought it all the way up to the last day of session, and we won. And we were really excited about that. Why? Because we put lots of time and effort into coming to see folks like you all and encouraging you to get involved in state issues, particularly this one. Now, everybody knows the census is every 10 years, right? That process everybody goes through, email, filler, whatever. The following year, when all that data comes in, The state legislature is charged with redrawing maps, right? Both congressional and state legislative maps. Does anybody know who was contracted to draw these maps in 2011 with our last census? Probably never guess. Go. You want to guess, Harry?
It's probably a bad guess, but I remember it was like the Redistricting Majority Project, or RedMap. Was that the one?
So, yes, they've had, the Republican Party has had since the early 1970s in place all these plans, and this was like their big plan, right? Take over all the state legislatures, take over all the governor's mansions in every state. And so far, they've been very successful. And they've used this model about gerrymandering and redistricting to do so. But in 2011, here in the state of Georgia, now if you call the state capitol, they'll deny this till the day they die. Troutman Sanders. Anybody ever heard of Troutman Sanders? It's a law firm with over 100 registered lobbyists at the state capitol. They were contracted to draw our district maps here in the state of Georgia. That's a big, 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 big problem for us and for all of Georgians, because they have a vested interest. I mean, that's a huge conflict of interest, right? Now, I should back up, and you all should understand, which I'm sure most of you do, the Democrats did this for many, many years. So this is not a Democrat, this is not a Republican thing, this is an incumbent protection plan. And that's simply what it is. We have no term limits on these offices in Georgia. And as you know, the great Calvin Smyre, the dean of the House here in the state of Georgia, lives right in Columbus. And I think he was first elected in, what, 72, 74? A long time ago. So these districts are drawn in a way that these folks have no opposition. They don't have to worry about any opposition. And they also don't have to worry about dealing with issues that affect the entire state. So that's why we see things like religious liberty, abortion bills come up, opportunity school district bills, because they're all social bills that really have nothing to do with the problems that are facing Georgians, but they're trying to bring home a little nugget of something to the primary 10% voters that live in their district. So what we as an organization, and we're working with about 26 other organizations here in Georgia to try to pass some statewide reform, which we recognize we're not going to get done probably before the next census in 2020, but we're trying to do sort of a local approach. So let me tell you about the reform. At the state level, we're trying to pass constitutional amendments that would ensure that we had an independent citizens redistricting commission. Big word. But basically is made up of 14 people. Let's see, there are, if I can remember this correctly, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, 4 independents and 3 independents and 1 person who is chosen by the state Supreme Court. These folks are not appointed by any political official or anything like that. Voting records would be checked, to ensure that folks that are independent actually are, and all of these things. They would oversee this whole process. So instead of hiring and contracting private firms to draw our maps, or instead of relying on state legislators who have a vested interest in staying in power, there would be a 14-person commission that would be in charge of overseeing this process. Now, redistricting is something that people kind of like, it's policy heavy, and a lot of people are like, it's a lot of numbers, I don't understand it. But as we, as a nation, since last November, are sort of developing this new civic consciousness, it's becoming more and more apparent to people that this absolutely is the foundation of good government. Now, in Atlanta, and I'll use that as an example because I probably know the districts better up there than I do down here, you can drive 1 mile down North Avenue, which is like right in sort of the middle of Midtown, near Georgia Tech, if you're familiar. You can drive through 5 house districts in 1 mile. It's crazy. So what we saw with these 2011 maps are really, and if you pull up the Georgia General Assembly website, you can see all of the districts are really long. And it's what we call cracking. And basically what you do is you draw districts in a way that they're pretty much ungovernable. So, another example, folks in Midtown Atlanta have the same representative as folks near the airport, which if you know anything about Atlanta, I know you guys probably go there somewhat, that's a long, those people have very, very different needs. So not only does it make it hard to govern, but it makes it hard to be governed. Because you're like, oh, you know, my person lives way up in Atlanta, and you know, I'm dealing with airport noise, and I don't know, you know, how steeped in that policy they are. So it makes it virtually impossible for folks to be represented and for people to be represented. We see this at the congressional level and also at the state level. Now, if you're familiar at all with voting laws and all of those kinds of things, you probably know that in 2012, the Shelby case that basically took out the most important part of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the pre-clearance part. So really right now, Congress is supposed to be coming up with a new algorithm to determine discrimination, right? Because the pre-clearance idea was any state, I think it was like within the last 40 years that had a history of discrimination, had to send their maps to the Department of Justice to be approved before they put them into place. We don't have that anymore because the Supreme Court has taken that protection away. So without an independent commission, we're just like lame ducks. We don't vote on those maps as public. There's a Republican supermajority in the House and the Senate currently in the state legislature. So you have party power that is unchecked and will probably remain so for at least a little while. Now, we also think, and I think that you all will probably agree, that gerrymandering drives down voter turnout. Because, I mean, I'll be honest, if someone is running unopposed on my ballot, I don't vote. I don't vote for them. Because, like, what's the purpose? You're going to get 100% of the vote because you're the only person on there. And so a lot of people, next year is going to be a good example, midterm elections, right? They're going to go, doesn't really matter. I mean, nobody that represents me is running. Everybody's running unopposed for local and state elections, so I might as well just stay home and not engage. And that's a big problem too. We have most of the folks who are active voters in Georgia only voting every 4 years for the presidential. Where, you know, national issues, I know you guys are working really hard on those, very, very important. But what happens at the state level is going to affect us at a far greater rate than anything that happens at the national level. All politics is local, right? So we are trying to get together some core people in targeted areas across the state who are willing to carry a resolution urging their local government to adopt an independent redistricting commission. Now you might say, what districts do they draw? Well, you've got the Board of Education, county commissioners, city council, if that affects you. And those are pretty important positions. A lot of counties in the state are starting to go to at-large voting. That's not necessarily the way to go. That's sort of taking steps back and not really working toward progress. So we're looking for folks who are willing to sort of be guided by Common Cause and our partners to help to, I guess, usher in this conversation and to start people thinking about this at the local level so that when session comes back around next January, we have tangible things that we can take to the state legislature and say, in Savannah, look what they got done. In Albany, look what they got done. In Athens, look what they got done. Because everybody that we talk to disagrees with gerrymandering. It's one of my favorite things when I have lobbyists or citizen lobbyists come up to the Capitol and I'm training them. I'm like, get your cell phone out and ask them point blank, do they agree with gerrymandering? And they're like, well, no, I don't know, let me just, you know. They don't want to say yes, even though they're being protected by a gerrymandered district. They don't want to say no. They're just going to be, oh, do you hear that? There's a vote. I need to get back inside. And it's like we've caught several, particularly Senate leadership folks, on video. we've caught them saying, I would totally support this if you got this. And we said, great, we'll be calling you. So we have over 10,000 members in the state of Georgia. It's kind of like hard to believe because I feel like in Atlanta we're just sort of this bubble. But we are really trying to target areas outside of the Atlanta area because we think we'll gain more traction. And we also think that constituents outside of Atlanta have a lot more sway with their representatives and their senators in the state capital. You know, in Atlanta, it's Atlanta. Mm-hmm. When we travel around to different parts of the state, we find that, Sally Sue lives right next to her representative, and they go out to the farmer's market every other Saturday or whatever. We don't get that as much in Atlanta, and not to mention the fact people at the Capitol really don't like people for the most part, right? Oh, Atlanta takes everything. So we're looking to do something more outside of that metro Atlanta area and try to push reform in localities that can eventually rise to the state level. So redistricting is good. It's something that you should support. It's something you should talk to your neighbors about, your friends, your family, everybody. And it's something also that even though they're not in session right now, you can still make phone calls. You can still send emails. You can still, if you happen to be up at the Capitol, pop into their office and leave a message for them. It's very, very, very vital that they hear from us on this issue. Now, we had and the handout has this on there too, our reform resolutions in the Senate were able to get a hearing this past session. Now, they didn't have enough people there to take a vote. I don't know how that happened. Had the meeting at like 8 a.m. We showed up with 250 people. And they were like, who did this? Who put this together? They're nervous because they know we're watching them. And something that used to be very sort of nerdy and policy heavy is now something that normal people who were not normally engaged in the political process or normally engaged in this kind of thing are talking about. They're posting about it on social media. They're going to meetings about it. They're calling our offices asking how they can help. So these folks just kind of like awoke a sleeping giant without realizing that it had become such. So on the back of that sheet, on the back of the handout, there are targeted members of the House and Senate Reapportionment Committee who we are really trying to apply pressure to so that this bill, even though we defeated it this past session, it's still alive. We don't want them to bring it up again. We want them to know that Georgians are watching what they do. And if you want to have incumbent advantage, incumbent protection, Common Cause says, then you run a good campaign. You have a good voting record to vote on. But you don't supply incumbent advantage. You don't say, we're just going to draw people in and out of the district. We're going to draw the district to benefit us the most. That's not democratic. And political parties, and I've heard the Democrats say this, I've heard Republican parties say this, we'll find people to run in these races. That's all fine and well, but you're still not going to win because they're gerrymandered. So the point is not necessarily how many people ran unopposed, but it's working these districts around so that they make the most sense for the voters. We like to say, let the voters choose their representatives, their elected officials, versus the elected officials choosing who votes for them. Right? Because it's the complete opposite of democracy. Let me just touch on the voting thing, too. So Common Cause is hopefully getting ready to engage in a rather large, another sort of in tandem statewide project to help push the legislature and the governor's office to purchase new voting machines. So if you're not familiar, I don't want to bore you with a whole bunch of history, but we've had our current voting machines since 2002. They operate on Windows 2000 operating system. And if you know anything about that, Windows no longer, or Microsoft no longer services. So it's kind of like, hopefully nothing's happened to them. If you're keeping up with any of this stuff, KSU just got hacked. One of the voting officials had 2 machines lifted off their truck in Cobb County right before the special election in the 6th. Fulton County, during the special election, put the wrong memory card in and ended up screwing up the whole system. We had to wait like 6 hours to get the votes to come in. So Common Cause, along with other groups, we say, yeah, it might be time to at least, at the very least, service our machines and provide a paper trail so that our elections are auditable and verifiable. Did you know we can't audit our elections right now?
No.
It's crazy. I mean, it absolutely like makes you, we are only 1 in 5 states who do not participate in paper trail process. And Secretary Kim says, oh, that's too expensive. And why would Common Cause be asking for paper trails when that's really not progressive? That's like taking a step back into the dark ages. And we say, well, given all of the hoopla about elections being stolen and all of the hacking and all of that, what would it hurt to have a paper trail? Our machines are equipped to do so. I can't imagine it would be too terribly expensive, but at least it would give the voters a little more peace of mind, right? Your vote sometimes doesn't count all the way. Did you know that? It can be a fraction of a vote. So my vote could be 0.5, yours could be 0.2. Because the current way the software is set up and the Diebold machines that we use, it counts fraction votes in certain circumstances. I know, right? When I found that out, I was like, how in the world does that work? I've never seen like a, 100.2 votes or something. How does that work? Well, the problem is our machines are really old and they need to be serviced at the very least. But Common Cause, along with other groups, believe that the only way that we can ensure election integrity is to replace the machines, which of course is going to be a 4 to 5 year process and pretty expensive. But when you have machines that can't even be serviced anymore, technically, then you sort of run into a problem. So we're sort of working on these 2 tracks right now that are very, in our opinion, good government issues, basic, fundamental issues to democracy. But the redistricting, we know, is going to take some time because part of the redistricting push is educating Georgians on exactly what that means and how it affects you. Because, I mean, let's be honest, like, it's hard to get behind something and get really driven to combat an issue if you don't think it affects you, right? But I would say, and I mean, I guess I can say, I live in a 90% African American city. And so it's pretty democratic. I think it's like close to 100% democratic. It doesn't matter. I still want to have a fair elections process. I still want there to be a Republican on the ballot because, it's America. That's what we should do. And districts shouldn't be drawn in a way that give partisan, political advantage or racial advantage to anyone. So those are sort of the 2 issues that we're mainly focused on for this summer and fall leading up to next session. The voting machines project, I'm hoping we can get off the ground. If you are interested at all in doing any research on that issue, Verify Voting is one of our partner organizations, and they along with Rocky Mountain Foundation, just filed suit in CD6. They have a hearing actually this Wednesday for paper ballots in that election. We're just trying to bring as much attention and visibility to these issues as possible. Because really and truly, until last November, people weren't talking about the voting machines and the fact that, does my vote count? Like, can I even trust this machine, right? Well, some of us were, right. But by large in part, especially here in Georgia, people just assume I'm going to put my ballot in and everything's great. Turn it back in and whatever, it's fine. But when you really start looking at these issues and the age of the machine, the technology, and all of those things, it is imperative that we get everything sort of on the federal level. We're really trying to push that these federal voting rules and laws are implemented and enforced in the state of Georgia. They're currently really not being enforced. And what happens is groups like mine have to go litigate, and we don't want to do that. We don't want, it costs taxpayers millions of dollars to litigate these issues in court. It's much more effective for us to go around and speak to people and have a grassroots appeal. And that way, too, the public has a buy-in. And it's not just about these nonprofits doing all of this litigating. I'm sure my attorneys in my national office in D.C. love to litigate, but it's not really something that I think is the most effective. I think it's much more effective to have legislators hear from you all about the importance of making every vote count and that every vote is protected. So, with that, I'll open it up to some questions. There's always lots of questions. I'm happy to answer them.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was very active in our local Democratic Party up until a couple of years ago. I live in a district that is totally Republican on one side of the street. On the other side of the street, it's Democratic. So consequently, voting for a state legislator, I don't vote, because it was my understanding that the Democratic Party, and I would assume the Republican Party, had to prepare young people or older people to become involved in running for a position. And yet, so far, and I've lived in North Columbus for 35 years.
Okay.
And I've never seen a Democrat running in our district. And at one point I was involved in trying to get a workshop going. But the people involved and were thinking about it were all from a different part of Columbus that already had Democrats in there. So it was like, okay. So I'm wondering what pressure is being put on local Democratic, and I assume Republican parties, to make sure that people are up and ready to run.
I can't speak to that being a nonpartisan organization. I mean, personally, I know that I've seen some efforts on both sides to what they call build the bench, right? But I mean, no, I feel like no one would be encouraged to run in a district like that because it's so solidly Republican and it's drawn in a way that discourages opposition. And really looking at, and I kind of know the demographics of North Columbus, you may be, unless you're going to move, you may be. It's pretty, but from our standpoint, from a Common Cause standpoint, the issue is redistricting. And instead of political parties, beating the drum of let's build the bench, they should beat the drum of fair elections.
Okay.
And that should be like number one. And, the minority party obviously is at a disadvantage, and it seems like they would maybe want to beat louder.
Thank you.
Yes.
One of the things about the current gerrymandered districts that people forget is because the outcome is almost certain, there is virtually no genuine discussion of issues.
Right.
The guy who's in the party that has this particular territory is going to talk bumper stickers to enthuse his base, and real issues will never get an airing. There's going to be no serious debate with people pulling and tugging on ideas to say what would be best. And as someone who, I would say probably about 10 years ago worked at the polls, I know exactly what you're talking about. When you're talking about those die-bolt machines, they are god-awful. They are rickety. They are made in China. God only knows what is really inside them as far as programming. Yes, okay, they use Windows 2000, but is there something in the circuitry that can be adjusted so that if you are starting to get too many votes, a couple can be kicked over in this other bucket? Nobody knows. And they were lousy machines 10 years ago.
Right.
And there's no privacy around them like there is in other states.
Doesn't do anything.
But it's at some precincts I voted at, there are no dividers or anything
There's
like
no
that.
nothing.
You just walk up and to your point about the programming, the person that programmed the die-bolt machines that we purchased, that Kathy Cox purchased in 2002, The programmer, or for those, actually served time in the federal pen.
So that's encouraging. Really encouraging.
I was like, how many red flags does one person need to like, it's a bad idea.
Speaking of a paper trail, like, I mean, is it even possible for these machines to like, or when you collect, they collect the, you know, like from the votes from the dial machine and basically tabulate them and what have you. Is it possible for maybe like a paper trail to include, say, sending out an email receipts showing like that you who you voted for, and like after like voting is done and what have you? I think that would be like nice convenience to like get an email notification saying this is who you voted for, and it went to this email. But I think that would provide a not right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, for the future, that may be a good suggestion. You know, now we're just trying to get paper. I feel like that's hard enough. You know, that as you know, the Secretary of State's running for governor, so he's pretty much left his current office, and he's nowhere to be found. So that's really great.
I have a question about primary voting.
Mm-hmm.
Who makes the rules about how these primary elections are handled? Is it something at a state level, or is it the individual parties? Because one of the problems with voting in a primary is it's usually so damn inconvenient.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people in like the Georgia 2 congressional district have to go, you know, sometimes they have to come to Columbus, sometimes people have to go down to Albany or someplace. It seems so ridiculous. Some other times, like I went to one, it was up at Sonoy, you know, for the 3rd, and it was almost like it was a caucus situation. So if anybody couldn't make it that Saturday, well, too bad. That really limits the number of people who can vote, and so you end up sometimes getting some real wackadoodles running.
Well, that's a really good point, actually. We try to attend every, and I'm the only staffer in the state, so I say we, like I have an army of people, but we try to attend every Board of Elections meeting that we can. I would really encourage you all, if you're interested in voting rights and all of those things, to attend Board of Elections meetings. Because what we find is just being present in the room, there's a lot more accountability. And those folks will close and move polling locations all day long with no excuse. And the only way generally you can find out why they change is if you sue them. So I saw it a couple weeks ago in DeKalb County. They wanted to change 2, to your point about the 12 or however many that got changed in Fulton County.
They did change them all in DeKalb.
Yeah, and it's because of school closing during the summer. Most of these
voting polls were in schools.
Yes, 2 of them were. 2 of them were in
None of them in the north
elementary
end,
school.
north side of DeKalb.
No, this is like the center. It's like the very edge of the 6th, where it bumps up against the 4th.
I don't know anything about South DeKalb.
Yeah, there were 2 voting locations that got moved because they were schools and they were working on their air conditioning or something, whatever. You know, well, the governor knew good and damn well when he set these election dates that was going to be in the summer. And that these schools would be under, you know, some kind of, I mean, they always are. That's the only time they can really do anything to the schools. So that's why we're seeing all of these, and they're legitimate moves of precincts that really the counties, they can't do anything about. You know, the governor set these dates for the special election to fill Tom
And
Price's seat.
Georgia law sets the dates. I just read a long article in the paper about it.
Right, so, but in a special election situations,
That's
the
what I'm talking
governor.
about. That's the reason this election on the 20th is so far from the original primary.
Right, but he still has 30 days to set a special election that has to be within 60 days. But it's his decision. And the state, to your point, they set the primary dates. They set the calendar generally every 2 years. So next year they'll go into session, they'll set the primary calendar and the general calendar for their own elections, right? Because they're all up for re-election next year. And what we saw happen in 2012 is the Republicans rolled back that early voting. They did it again in 2013. The Republicans also changed the primary dates, We had always voted in the state, for state legislative races, the last Tuesday in July, always, for like 30, 40 years. They changed it to the last Tuesday, or the third Tuesday in May. And so what happened was you had a lot of folks in rural areas, they didn't know, and the local office didn't get them their paperwork in time, their new voting cards. So they would show up to the wrong precinct, wouldn't be able to vote. And so that happens time and time again, and a lot of people don't pay attention to what's happening at the state level, and so these laws get passed without really any objections. Because they think, well, you know, it'll be fine, they're going to do what they're going to do. It doesn't matter anyways, because we live in a red state. And it's not nearly as exciting as sharing memes about Trump. So it's really important to go visit those boards of elections meetings, and they're monthly. And they're not always like really easy to get to, but I would encourage you, if you're interested, to go. Yes, ma'am.
Change on the back here to call to support SR 6 and 7.
Right.
HR. As committee people, does William Wygon get a crap who I am? I mean, Ed Harbison is our senator.
Right, right.
So is it the same thing at federal level? Just even though it's a committee, just your own guy, just contact your own representative?
So we've put those folks on there as specific targets because they have leadership, or they have their governor, floor leader, or whatever. They have some sort of pull.
Or does it make sense for me to contact anyone
Yes.
but Ed Harbison?
When they're sworn in, they're sworn to serve all Georgians. And so I tell everybody that. I mean, if you see someone on the list, you don't recognize the name, and you don't live in their district, it doesn't matter. They still sit on this committee that still draws the districts for the entire state. And they are sworn to, you know, whatever the language is, but they're sworn to protect and serve all Georgians. So that's really important to remember. Specifically, chairpersons of committees.
What's the language of the resolutions?
So I'll actually send you both,
Yes.
so you can, if you want, you can email it out. But just like I mentioned, there's two resolutions, and one is sort of, this is what we want to prevent against, and there's 5 different things. And it's basically the typical things that we see, like in North Carolina, this redistricting case, Common Cause is actually involved in, that'll be in 2 weeks. Supreme Court's going to take up another case having to deal with racial and political gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering. So there are 5 different points we want to make sure are not present on the new maps when they're drawn, and things the commission would be held accountable to uphold. The second resolution actually talks about the makeup of the commission. So, you know, the partisans, the person who is a Georgia Supreme Court appointee, talks about their background and how you go about applying to be on the commission.
And you'll send us that language?
Yes, I'll send both of them to you. They're pretty short. But again, they're constitutional amendments. So at the bottom of both the resolutions, you'll see the constitutional question, the ballot question that we would like to see on the ballot.
It's not exactly related to like a redistricting, but I noticed that in a lot of states, like out west, you have initiative and referendum that people can submit petitions, like in order to file an initiative or referendum that will go to the public, like Colorado, California, etc. Is that also something that Common Cause would be working on, like on supporting, like for other states as well, and more in the eastern half of the country, including Georgia?
Yeah, so we've been successful in our reform in 6 states now, California being like the first really big one. And this is so crazy, but partly because of Arnold Schwarzenegger. He really supports this idea of independent redistricting, you know, which we were like, strange bedfellows, but you know, whatever, it works. So yeah, we will be, I think there's an effort right now in Delaware. I think they're trying to switch up their commission in Iowa. So we're doing this nationally. It's not just here in Georgia. I think the reason why we're so like laser focused on this in Georgia is because we see, I mean, and nationally speaking, like there's huge issues. You know, you see the base like in the 6th right now. People are like, oh, there's no way it's going to turn blue. Well, that's really the demographics of our state, right? It's much more purple than it ever was red or blue or whatever. And so, yeah, we're trying to really channel a lot of energy into the state of Georgia because folks like you are very interested in this idea and trying to do something locally. But yeah, I mean, that was like our biggest win was having it in California. We don't have state referenda here because I would much prefer to have something like this as a referenda than as a legislative process. But you work with what you got. Any constitutional amendment has to go directly through the legislature and pass 2/3 majority of both chambers. So, and then the Secretary of State can change the language of the ballot question if they choose to do so, which is another reason why we shouldn't have a partisan Secretary of State running our elections. It's very problematic. Anybody been on the Secretary of State's website in the last 2 years?
Yeah.
It's like a campaign website. Like Brian Kemp's face just, I'm like, wait, is this like for voting information, right? Or are you like, but, you know, I've already been shooed out of his office several times, so.
But not escalated.
No, not escalated. I have a friend in there, thank goodness. Although I think he probably distanced himself from me, but yeah, so that's basically what we're working on, and you have my contact information.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I'm out of business cards, but please take that sheet with you. I will send the legislation on to Laura for you all to read. Oh, I'm sorry, you had that.
No, I just have an action item for this group and every group that we go to, is that we go to the supervisor and board of election meetings here. When we were consistent in doing it, that's is how we got Sunday voting. When we became inconsistent in doing it, that's how we lost all of the precincts that we had Sunday voting for. So you have to go, and then with the purpose of becoming the next supervisor of elections. The supervisor of elections that we have here is the one that has the last word on everything, and she stops us a whole lot. And so we can become that.
That's
And
right.
She's also married to the chief of police. But hey, but we can do that. And so I really appreciate the grassroots that you're doing, and I'm recognizing that the legislature is going to the suing people. You know, we just need to work with them and meet in the middle, because it's so important. We may not have the majority in numbers grassroots, even though I think we do, but they'll come in and sue until we get there. And so everything that you're doing is just so important. And I love the independent commission. When the Supreme Court came down and said that it was okay to do, it was like, we've got to get it here. And people are like, Georgia? And it's like, yes.
Yeah.
Especially.
It's totally doable here. I mean, it really is. People, you know, will look at me like, wow. And I'm like, no, I mean, there's an appetite. You know, we have Tea Party activists calling my office, like, how can we get involved? I mean, this is a non-partisan issue completely, because it's all about democracy at the end of the day. So thank you for saying that, because I think that's really important. We hold them accountable. It's a lot easier for us to get things done.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Very.